Whatever happened to Xing Tian? What goes up must go down. And this especially goes for Xing Tian and his place in the meta. Pre-release Xing Tian was actually considered extremely weak. His damage felt so lackluster overall that before he was freed from the chains of PTS, he actually saw a big buff across all his base damage numbers and scalings. That didn't last too long. Less than a month after his initial release, Xing already saw his first nerfs due to being an almost mandatory pick in many game modes. Two abilities were targeted here. His one, Furious Roar, which has percentage damage and allows him to deal huge amounts of damage while building tanky, and his ultimate, Whirlwind of Rage and Steel. The ultimate damage and scaling was severely decreased. While the initial damage was enough to make him viable as a jungler with strong ganks, it was now more of a CC tool. Additionally, using beats against the ability was rewarded more, as the damage of the ult now scaled up the longer one stayed in it. The most significant change, however, was the wind-up time. While the 0.15 second extra delay before getting CC'd doesn't sound like much, it actually made it much easier to dodge or just walk out of Xing Tian's ult. Xing still wasn't done afterwards, continuing to dominate the solo lane. First, his ult cooldown was held constant at 100 seconds instead of scaling it down. Then, he saw health scaling and damage decrease. But none of that really seemed to affect Xing Tian all that much, as he still saw a good amount of play and good win rates. What ultimately ripped Xing Tian apart was Season 3. The description for his changes reads as follows. Some small adjustments for Xing Tian, mainly focused around some of his damage and cooldowns. These small adjustments, as they were called, included multiple cooldown increases and damage nerfs. The most important nerf, however, was the removal of the root from Xing Tian's hook slam. Instead, the ability now slowed for 30%, meaning a hard CC was turned into a relatively mediocre slow in a small radius. The root was relatively important as it was a good setup for Xing's ult and provided him with the necessary utility to do setups for his team. This wasn't the only thing that led to Xing Tian ending up in low tier though. Additionally, the Season 3 meta provided the solo laner with a lot of extra farm, as long as the character was able to farm effectively. While Xing Tian's clear in lane isn't too bad, it's abysmal for single target creeps like the boar, making it much harder for him to get the same extra farm as the enemy solo laner. In general, the solo lane was more geared towards late game characters like Vamana, who need the farm to become relevant and then roll out of solo lane like a raid boss. Neither of these points really applied for Xing, especially after his nerfs. At the same time, he had no potential as a support anymore, as his only hard CC was now in his ultimate. At this point, Xing Tian really doesn't have much. He has relatively low damage, relatively low CC, and no point in the game where he's extremely good or potent. His biggest scare potential, the ultimate, is also just an inferior version of what Ares can provide your team with. I personally think that Xing Tian is a very interesting character by design and his style is really cool, so I really hope he will get some kind of adjustments in the future that bring him back into the meta. With that, thank you guys for watching. Dukesloth out. P.S. I made a podcast with Brutal Magolini Time, and you can check that out on that channel. I will try and link it right here if that's possible. If you enjoy longer conversations about balance and fun stuff regarding Smite and other MOBAs, feel free to head over there. Although this Joust game was freaking terrible and I hate my teams.